a devoted mother, a successful businesswoman, and a marriage falling apart. On April 25, 2021, Dee Warner vanished from her Michigan farmhouse without a trace. Her car was still in the garage. Her phone was missing. And her 9-year-old daughter was left behind. What happened inside that farmhouse would become one of the most chilling mysteries in Lenawee County history. And the truth wouldn't come out for years. By the way, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe and tap the bell so you can be part of this community and never miss a cast. It was Sunday morning, April 25, 2021, in Lenawee County, Michigan. The air was crisp, the kind of spring morning when the chill of winter still clung to the farmland, but the sun promised warmth as it climbed higher. For most families, it was just another quiet Sunday. But for the Warner family, it would mark the beginning of a nightmare. 49-year-old Dee Warner was a woman everyone seemed to notice. She wasn't just a mother of 5, she was the force that kept her family and business running. Friends described her as tough but warm-hearted, a woman who demanded respect in a male-dominated trucking industry but still had a smile and energy that drew people in. Dee balanced long hours at the office with raising her children, including her youngest 9-year-old Lena, who rarely left her mother's side. That morning, her daughter Rochelle, better known as Rickle, got into her car for the short half-mile drive to her childhood home. It was a routine she never missed. Every Sunday morning, she and her mom had breakfast together. It was their tradition, their anchor in the middle of busy lives. But this Sunday, things felt different, though she couldn't have imagined how much. As Rickle pulled into the familiar driveway, her heart sank. Her mother's Cadillac was still parked neatly in the garage. Dale's Hummer sat at the office just down the road. Both cars were accounted for, but Dee was nowhere in sight. The silence of the house pressed in as Rickle stepped inside. The kitchen, usually alive with the smell of breakfast and her mother's chatter, was eerily still. He called out for her mom. Nothing. She moved through the house, checking room after room, corner after corner, but there was no sign of Dee. What she did find was unsettling. Tissues were scattered across the rooms as though someone had been crying or ill. Blankets were tossed on the couch, messy in a way that didn't fit Dee's usual orderliness. And upstairs, her mother's everyday essentials, her makeup bag, her curling iron, her hairdryer, were gone. But if Dee had packed to leave, why were her vehicles still here? Confusion quickly turned to fear. Rickle pulled out her phone and dialed her mother. Straight to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. This was not her mother. Dee was glued to her phone, always a quick responder, always checking in. For her not to answer was more than unusual. It was alarming. The unease gnawed at Rickle as she drove down the road to her Uncle Greg and Aunt Shelley's house. When they opened the door, she could barely get the words out. We can't find her. Her car is here. We've called everybody. She's just gone. Greg, Dee's older brother, wasted no time. He called his sister's phone, certain she'd pick up for him. Dee always answered his calls, always. But this time the line just rang and then silence. He sent a text. No reply. For the first time in his life, Greg Hardy didn't know where his sister was. And that realization hit like a stone in his chest. By now panic was creeping in. The family began checking places Dee might have gone. Friends' houses, the farm office, businesses she managed. But everywhere they looked, there was no trace of her. Then came the detail that changed everything. Dee's daughter Lena, her youngest, her shadow, had spent the night with cousins. But Dee hadn't called to check on her. She hadn't come to pick her up. To those who knew Dee, this was the biggest red flag yet. Dee would never abandon Lena. The bond between mother and daughter was unbreakable. And so, within hours, what had begun as a slightly unusual Sunday became something far more chilling. Dee Warner, the woman who seemed to have her hand in everything, had vanished. And as her family gathered together in disbelief, one thought began to echo in their minds. Something terrible had happened inside that farmhouse. The first hours after Dee Warner's disappearance felt like a slow, sickening slide into a nightmare. What began as a missing person worry quickly became something far darker. Dee's daughter, Rickle, who had driven the half-mile to her childhood home for their weekly Sunday breakfast, found the house strangely disordered and her mother gone. Both Dee's car and her husband's vehicle were on the property. Dee's phone went straight to voicemail. Inside the house, tissues were scattered, blankets lay tossed on the couch, and Dee's makeup bag and hair tools were missing. Little details that made the scene feel off, not like a planned exit but like something interrupted. The family's unease hardened into fear almost immediately. As the family fanned out, the red flags multiplied. Dee's youngest daughter, 9-year-old Lena, had slept at a cousin's house the night before. But Dee hadn't gone to collect her or even called to check in, which those who knew Dee said was out of character. Her older children checked the security footage from the farm office and found nothing. No sign of Dee leaving, no walk across the yard, no vehicle departure. For the relatives watching the grainy camera clips, that blankness felt as loud as a scream. When law enforcement arrived that evening, they spoke with Dale Warner at the property. His demeanor, calm, measured, telling deputies Dee had been sleeping on the couch, and suggesting she might have left of her own accord with a second secret phone, did little to settle the family. He showed relatives a wedding ring, saying Dee had left it on his desk. Family members later said the ring was unusually valuable and claimed leaving it behind didn't fit Dee's pattern. Crucially, Rickle and others would later testify they each heard slightly different versions of the previous night's events from Dale, and those inconsistencies would linger like a low hum of suspicion. The family didn't wait for answers. Within days, Greg Hardy, Dee's brother, mobilized neighbors and volunteers to comb hundreds of acres of farmland on foot. They covered fields, creek lines and woods, walking until their boots were caked with Michigan mud, but they found nothing. Frustration and grief turned to impatience. Greg publicly pushed the investigation, arranging vigils and, in a move that got national attention, taking out a billboard that read "Help Dale Find Dee," a sarcastic pressure tactic aimed squarely at the husband the family distrusted. Those efforts caught the eye of a Missouri investigator and attorney, Billy Little, who agreed to come and help the family think like detectives and keep public and legal pressure on the case. As weeks turned into months, the case morphed from frantic searching into a complex, frustrating puzzle. No CCTV footage showed Dee leaving, there were no bank transactions or social media sign-ins after that night, and law enforcement searches kept turning up nothing conclusive. The family pressed for more resources, and in August 2022, the Michigan State Police formally stepped in to assist and eventually lead the probe. That escalation changed the tenor of the case. What had been a local tragedy now had state investigators, forensic teams, and a new urgency behind it. But while investigators methodically probed properties and records, the question that haunted everyone only deepened. If Dee didn't walk away, where had she gone? And who exactly knew more than they were saying? Greg, Billy Little and the family kept pushing, turning over every detail, every memory, every odd behavior into a lead. They followed up on the tire tracks Rickle had described near the back of the house, on employees who remembered the fight the night before, on 1,000 small inconsistencies that, collected together, began to sketch a theory the family couldn't shake. But even as pressure mounted, the most important evidence, the thing that would finally prove what happened, still hadn't surfaced. And then months later, something shifted. Investigators returned to a place the family had long wondered about. What they would discover there would blow the case wide open, and change everything the family thought they knew. Once the initial shock faded, the search for answers turned methodical and relentless. Months after Dee vanished, the Lenawee County case drew in more resources. In August 2022, the Michigan State Police formally stepped in to lead the probe, bringing forensic teams and statewide investigative experience to work alongside the sheriff's office. The move changed the tone of the search. What had been a frantic local effort became a professional, painstaking investigation. Detectives rebuilt Dee's final 24 hours piece by piece. They pulled phone records, bank statements, social media history, and hours of security footage. The puzzle deepened. There were no credit card charges, no social media logins, no calls after late April 24 to 25, 2021, and the farm cameras showed no clear image of Dee leaving the property. In other words, there was no digital trail to follow. That absence of digital life, investigators later said, was as telling as any smoking gun. At the same time, the family refused to sit still. Dee's brother, Greg Hardy, recruited a Missouri investigative attorney, Billy Little, who began working pro bono with the family in 2022. Little brought a different playbook: drones, fresh canvassing of properties, and what he described as psychological operations meant to keep public pressure on the case and keep the spotlight on key people of interest. Greg even bought a billboard that read, "Help Dale find Dee," a sarcastic thrust meant to shame and unsettle the husband who to the family did not seem like a frantic spouse. Little and the family now worked both the ground and the press, chasing every lead and forcing the case to stay in public view. Investigators re-interviewed witnesses and re-interviewed the last people who said they saw Dee, family members, employees, and crucially her husband Dale. Dale's early body cam interview with the Lenawee County deputy. The conversation played widely in the press, left viewers with a strange image. A calm man who said his wife had been sleeping on the couch that morning and suggested she might have a secret second phone. Those comments and the small inconsistencies in his retelling of the night before stuck in the minds of detectives and family alike. As the investigators sifted through business records and testimony, finances emerged as a recurring thread. Testimony in the preliminary hearing painted a picture of tangled business accounts across the Warners' trucking, farming, and chemical enterprises, transfers, payroll problems, and arguments over money. Dee's own son, who kept the books, testified that Dee had been fed up and had texted that she was done, a line prosecutors would later point to as motive and context. The financial stress made the marriage and the business a key area of investigative focus. Over the next months, law enforcement expanded searches, repeatedly walking fields, digging in wells, running scans and sweeps across multiple properties owned or used by the Warners. The family, privately and publicly, kept pushing investigators to re-examine sites they found suspicious. Greg says he flagged a particular metal fertilizer tank early on. Something about it nagged at him. Investigators, listening to leads, kept returning to that idea. Then the probe moved from routine detective work into forensics and warrants. Police obtained court-authorized search warrants for several Warner properties, and on one of those warrants they recovered a large metal tank that had been marked out of service. The documents later described a tank with unusual non-factory weld work on one end, a modification that would draw investigators' attention. Technicians x-rayed and scanned the tank. What they saw on those scans was not something a family or a county wanted to imagine. As investigators closed in, arrests followed. State police announced an arrest in November 2023, charging Dale Warner with open murder and evidence tampering, even though at that time, a body had not yet been publicly produced. The charge itself signaled the prosecution believed it had gathered enough circumstantial and testimonial evidence to move forward. Later, additional arrests and charges would follow as the investigation widened. Through every interview, search, and hearing, one line repeated from the family's private investigator: "The evidence that she's dead is the absence of evidence that she's alive." That grim philosophy kept the pressure on detectives to keep digging. Every test result, every shifted account, every new forensic lead accumulated into a single question. Had the search finally closed in on the one place the family had suspected all along? And then, after years of digging, scanning, and researching the properties, the team prepared one more forensic maneuver: a detailed scan of that modified tank and a careful plan to remove it from the barn. The family gathered, law enforcement stood ready, and the room felt impossibly still. The images from the scanner came back. What investigators saw on that screen would rip the investigation wide open and change everything the family had been fighting for. By the time the investigation shifted from frantic searching to cold, methodical work, the questions had multiplied, and so had the contradictions. For 3 years, Dee Warner's family lived with the impossible. Their mother and sister simply gone, no messages, no transactions, no social media life after April 24 to 25, 2021. That silence became its own kind of evidence, a void that screamed the family's worst fear: someone had taken her. Then came the legal twists that deepened the mystery. In November 2023, authorities arrested Dee's husband Dale Warner, charging him with open murder and tampering with evidence, an extraordinary move in a case that still lacked a body at the time. The arrest made clear prosecutors believed they had built a circumstantial case strong enough to move forward. Even after the arrest, courtroom fights only raised more questions. In June 2024, a judge found probable cause to send the case to trial, a judicial acknowledgement that while no single smoking gun existed, the totality of the evidence merited a jury's review. The decision gave the family some validation, but it didn't answer the most personal questions. Where was Dee and how had she been hidden for so long? Part of the mystery centered on the place no one had thought to look closely enough: Investigators had searched fields, wells and woodlots for years with nothing to show for it. Yet the property itself held a piece of the puzzle they'd somehow overlooked. A large agricultural tank used for anhydrous ammonia and fertilizer storage. A tank that had been welded shut, marked out of service, and modified with an obvious non-factory weld. When investigators scanned that tank, the image on the screen changed everything. How could such a thing have gone unnoticed? That question cut to the heart of the case. The Warners' farm was full of machinery, storage vessels and equipment. The kind of place where one tank could be tucked away among many. Family members and investigators later said video footage showed Dale near welding equipment on the day Dee vanished, and the tank itself bore signs of having been altered after April 2021. Those details, weld marks, placement and timing, became touchstones in the family's belief that someone on the farm had used the property itself to hide what they wanted hidden. Then there were the human mysteries, the conflicting stories, the small lies, the things that didn't fit. Dale told different people slightly different versions of the night and morning Dee disappeared. He suggested Dee might have a secret second phone, yet he couldn't produce a number. He showed family members a wedding ring and said Dee had left it on his desk, a detail relatives argued didn't jibe with the woman they knew. Those inconsistencies, repeated again and again, hardened into suspicion. The case didn't stop being messy after the tank was identified. Other arrests followed and then shifted. In March 2025, authorities charged Dale's son, Jaron Warner, with accessory and evidence tampering counts, a development that suggested investigators were probing whether others helped conceal what happened. But by mid-May 2025, some of those charges had been dropped. A reminder that indictments and guilt are not the same thing, and that the legal story continued to twist in ways the family hadn't expected. Through it all, the family's pain and the public fascination with the no-body case fed each other. Billboards, vigils, national TV segments and the presence of private investigators kept the story in the spotlight. But the spotlight only highlighted more unknowns. Who welded the tank shut? When exactly did alterations occur? How would prosecutors prove what happened inside a barn years earlier? And perhaps most wrenching, even after the discovery, why did so much still feel unresolved? Those questions brought the case to a single terrible hinge point. Investigators had a modified tank, weld marks, security video showing suspicious movement, and a stack of circumstantial evidence. Yet tying those threads into a courtroom-winning narrative would require proving not just opportunity but motive and action, and answering one final brutal question. What did the scans actually show inside that tank, and who had the means and the will to turn it into a grave? After 3 years of searching, the county finally got the break the Warner family had been praying for. And it arrived in the most horrifying way possible. In mid-August 2024, investigators executed a search warrant on property tied to Dale and Dee Warner and recovered human remains from a sealed agricultural storage cylinder, an anhydrous ammonia/fertilizer tank that had been altered and marked out of service. The discovery instantly transformed a painful missing person mystery into a homicide investigation. Technicians who scanned and then opened the tank found evidence that confirmed the family's worst fears. The Jackson County Medical Examiner later positively identified the remains as Dee and Warner, and authorities ruled the death a homicide. For a family who had lived 3 summers and winters with the blank ache of not knowing, the finding was both a devastating end and a necessary answer. Dee had not walked away. She had been hidden in plain sight. The tank itself became a focal point of the prosecution's narrative. Court documents and reporting note the cylinder had an obvious, non-factory weld and was stored in a barn on property associated with the Warners. Details investigators believe point to deliberate concealment. Forensic teams x-rayed and scanned the vessel, and detectives retraced movement captured on security video the morning Dee disappeared. Surveillance showed activity in the welding area that investigators considered highly relevant to the timeline. Those technical details, welds, scans, timestamps, are the kind of evidence prosecutors will stress when they explain how a missing person became a body in a metal tomb. For Dee's children and siblings, the discovery produced a complicated, rushed relief. Rickelbach, who first realized her mother was missing in April 2021, told reporters the moment she was told what had been found, "It was my mom. Well, it was a body in a tank." She and other family members described a mix of sorrow and a grim sense of validation. The rumor that Dee had simply fled was finally silenced. but the cost of that answer was unspeakable. The family later held a private burial. Her youngest daughter, Lena, then about 12, was there as relatives tried to give their mother a proper resting place after years of not knowing. Legally, the case had already begun to move before the discovery was made public. Dale Warner had been arrested in November 2023 and charged with open homicide and tampering with evidence. An extraordinary step given that no body had yet been identified, and prosecutors argued the cumulative circumstantial evidence justified bringing charges. After the tank was recovered and the remains identified, the family's narrative that Dee was taken from them began to align even more closely with what investigators were building. The investigation's ripple effects kept unfolding in 2024 to 2025. In early 2025, authorities charged Dale's son, Jaron Warner, with accessory and tampering counts. Those charges were later dismissed in May 2025, a reminder that indictments are only the start of a legal process and that not every development points toward conviction. Meanwhile, Dee's children filed a civil wrongful death lawsuit seeking at least $100 million, a move that shows how the family is also fighting to secure financial accountability and to make sure Dee's estate and legacy are protected. What happens next will be decided in court. Pretrial hearings and motions have already echoed the larger questions everyone wants answered. Who had the opportunity and motive? What did the forensics show? And how will the prosecution tie circumstantial threads into a story a jury can convict on? The trial date has shifted as pretrial motions and logistics play out. Judges have weighed venue and jury selection concerns, mindful of the intense media attention this no-body-turned-body-found case has attracted. For Dee's family, the discovery of her remains brought a measure of truth but not closure. They still have to watch a courtroom to see whether the state can prove beyond a reasonable doubt what investigators now allege. For a woman who ran a business, raised children and was described by loved ones as fierce and loving, the final chapter is now being written in legal filings, courtroom testimony and forensic reports, and the outcome will determine whether the family's long fight for answers becomes a long fight for justice. If this case grabbed you the way it grabbed us, if you feel anger, sadness, or a need to understand, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below with your theory about what happened the night Dee disappeared. Share this video so more people know the story. And if you want to follow every courtroom development, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell. The trial is the next chapter. Will the evidence finally be enough to convict? That's the question that will decide whether justice at last catches up to a family that refused to stop searching.